Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. We'll start out with the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll do the roll call, please.
Vice President Dom,
Here.
Treasurer Fritz,
Here.
Secretary Thomas, absent. Trustee Gayton,
Here.
Trustee Zimmerman,
Present.
Trustee Everard.
Here.
And Trustee Wazor.
That is wonderful. Yeah, I did not know any of my great grandparents in both.
We didn't either. Hey, are we good? All right. So we'll do the oath of office for our new trustee, Ron.
I, Ron White Store.
Who did I say?
He's gonna read it to you.
I'm gonna read you.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I guess, starting where you're at, raise your right hand, please. And repeat after me. I, Ron,
I, Ron White Store,
do solemnly affirm. that I
solemnly affirm
that I faithfully discharge
that I faithfully discharge
the duties of the office of trustee.
the duties of the office of trustee.
As a member of the Board of Trustees
As a member of the Board of Trustees
of the McHenry County Conservation District,
of the McHenry County Conservation District,
in accordance with the Constitution of the United States,
in accordance with the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
Constitution of the State of Illinois,
the Illinois compiled statutes,
the Illinois compiled statutes,
and any applicable rules and policies of the County of McHenry, and the policies and bylaws. Go ahead.
any applicable rules and policies of the County of McHenry, and the policies and bylaws governing
The McHenry County Conservation District,
the McHenry County Conservation District
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
And you're sworn in.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll look for any public comments. Anybody out there?
I'd like to say something.
Sure, go ahead.
My name's Pat Lawler and I'm from Paddle the Kish, and I wanted to thank the Conservation District for allowing us to use the parking lot last weekend and next weekend so that we could clear the river and park our cars safely.
Excellent. Well, good to hear and glad we could accommodate.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat, for your work out there.
Yes. Okay, anybody else with public comment?
There is no one else.
Okay. We'll go ahead with a brief presentation. The Lions Prairie. Go ahead.
Thank you. Am I just at the podium good for everybody?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
great.
Thank you for having us here today. I'm Dave Kraft. I'm an engineer at Hay and Associates. We've done a lot of work with the Conservation District over quite a few years. We're very very appreciative of that and the continued opportunity to work with you on a lot of projects. The School Springs project, we're working with you on some of the Prairie Trail improvements now, and the Lions Prairie Marsh study is definitely one that we're very happy to be a part of, helping the district look at some of the issues out there. So that's what we're here today to do, is kind of walk through what we've done so far and look at some of the potential additional scope items that, were presented and facing decisions on whether or not those may be necessary on some of what we've done so far. So again, I think everyone is aware of the project. You had Lions Prairie and Marsh. This is one of the district-owned parcels. It's actually in Lake County along the Fox River. Like many shorelines along the Fox River, there has been a little bit of erosion being observed, over the years, and our task has been to assess that, look at potential mechanisms for how that may be occurring. Look at some potential solutions to address it, and also assign some costs to that, and then you'll get next steps. So I think Elizabeth, if you want to go to the next slide. We'll start with a little history. Some of this is duplicative of, I know, what Gabe has presented to the board in the past on the project. We'll go a little bit through site history, project goals, meeting goals of this meeting, and then some of our preliminary findings as we go through here. This is kind of the map showing the floodplain and floodway on the property. You can see pretty much the entirety of the lower end of the property is within the floodplain of the Fox River, so obviously impacted by those forces. Site history, again, it is an Illinois designated nature preserve in addition to being a conservation district property. We're going to look a little bit at the history of the dam downstream, and then a little bit of project history. Some of this is again redundant to I think what Gabe presented initially as part of the study basis. So this is the nature preserve portion of the property on the map here. It's a very high quality habitat in there. One of the things we'll get into as we get a little bit more into our assessment is really those high quality areas on site, and talking with district staff and looking at things are not at substantial risk due to some of the bank erosion that's been happening along the Fox. For the most part, those high quality habitats are well protected. A little bit of history of the Algonquin Dam. Originally started as a mill dam, was required by the Office of Water Resources in 1939. The mill dam was removed shortly thereafter, and the Algonquin Dam was built in 1947. There were dam improvements made in 2002 to, I think, just modernize, but also address some of the bigger flood events that we've seen. One of the critical dates on here, which we'll highlight as we move forward, but the 1939 number and 1947 number, one of the things that's been used for comparison is that 1939 aerial that everyone likes to go back to in our area to look at what things might have been. You can see that the more modern dam was post that aerial, whereas that aerial has been used to do some of the evaluation previously on what may have been lost along that shoreline. We'll get into that specifically in the next couple of slides. So dam history, this is just a sort of schematic representation of the current dam with the updates that were done in 2002. The main thing we want to kind of highlight here is that the top of the crest of the dam is at about elevation 730.1. We've highlighted on here, and we'll show on later exhibits, that the shoreline at Lyons is in the 732 to 733 range. The floodplain elevation is about 738 in that area. So the takeaway here is the projection of the impoundment from that dam absolutely does have an impact within this area, and is part of what's going on along those shorelines. That'll be relevant in how we assess what may have been lost using aerial photographs, but also just to understand that that would play a role in any kind of assessment of how things will happen. The other thing to note on here is that there is the reservoir upstream is about 849 acres, 850 acres, and that the Fox Waterway is the agency that regulates navigation along the channel, including slow and wake zones, which is one of the things we'll talk a little bit about as we move forward. Project history, again, this is kind of the summary that was provided to us in the RFP that we responded to, which is the last item on here, but this has been a long-term issue for discussion amongst the community, including the Fox Waterway, that ultimately led to the request for proposals that was issued that our firm responded to and was awarded for this project. Again, I think it's part of the bigger picture of sediment within the system, sediment within both the river and the upstream lakes, how to manage that, some of the Fox Waterway and other agencies' goals for the waterway, and stewarding that. When you look at these big open spaces, that is one of the things we do. You can see in this image, this was part of the original mapping done by the Conservation District showing some of the potential loss. This is where we get into, some of these things. You can see the 118 and the 212 feet identified there. We'll get a little more specific to that, but again, the relevance there too is that was before the dam caused this inundation in this area. So when you look at some of what that measures may be due just simply because the dam has now inundated those areas, and areas that look like they have been eroded are actually just influenced by the dam. We've got a couple of images, which again are on these foam boards here, that'll show that in a little more detail. So project goals, for this project, the starting pieces, and what were the initial tasks were assess the site. So we've been out there, from both sides, from the riverside and canoes and from the, from the land side. The public outreach and engagement piece, which we'll get into a little more detail, that's the part that we've sort of wrapped up in the last month or so here. And is, kind of informing the back end of the study. We've done preliminary alternative and cost development to give some idea of what the implications of these projects may be, both from a cost perspective, regulatory perspective, practicality perspective. We'll get into that. And then, reporting and recommendations, pending what decisions on what additional information the board may choose to pursue, will obviously provide a final report and recommendations, on that. The image here just shows sort of a healthy river valley. We'll get into some of the photos onto, what portions of this kind of are represented by that, what portions have been impacted, we kind of move forward. So the meeting goals, with this meeting, we kind of just want to walk through what we've preliminarily identified, give you an idea of what we've seen, what options may exist, solicit your input, so that it can be included in, the final, version of our report and study, and then kind of discuss the project and make sure that, we remain aware of what the district's goals are, and particularly the board's goals are, as far as, identifying opportunities and solutions for the project. What we've got here, I don't know if anyone had the chance to hop on there. We did create a linked website to solicit public information, which we'll get into in the next slide here. So this was the link to that was live for a little over a month earlier this year to solicit information. So preliminary assessment, again, site assessment, alternative development, and cost opinions that will get out there. I was in the back of this canoe with one of our other staff members, so we've really gotten out there and looked at things that are going on there. One of the interesting things from this picture, which will be projecting some other ones, is what we didn't find is high eroded banks that were clearly showing signs of rapid recession, like we might see in other parts of the Fox or other waterways in the area. There's a fairly healthy marsh complex there, which is, kind of the fact that it's a nature preserve and has been designated a nature preserve speaks to, the quality of the habitat out there too. So a lot of what we've done thus far is more of a subjective look at things, those last couple of tasks, which we'll get into, related to more, quality or quantitative analysis, will be founded by some of this. One of the things we've done, and again, looking at the aerial photographs and assessing conditions, in addition to getting out in the field, is really look at gauge records, pull whatever information we could from USGS gauges on the system, understand the history of the dams, which we just went through with some of the elevations and dates, and then look at the history of aerial photographs, in the area. Again, what we see in that top aerial on the left, that's the 1939 aerial, and it looks like you've got a lot of high and dry land, and clearly the inner, the inner wetland area is less. Again, the one of the key takeaways there is not only are we relatively certain that that was a summer aerial, meaning likely lower water levels. We don't know the exact date from that, but also that's before the influence of the dams. So the old mill dam wasn't as high, meaning it was more of a functioning river system. And you can see the bottom left photo. We're lucky to have an aerial kind of, near the peak of the 1993 flood, or at least while the water was still high. So it's really easy to draw conclusions from that we've lost all of this land due to erosion. But one of the key takeaways and what we've tried to really understand is the reality of that. When you take one of the highest events the river's ever seen and compare it to a photo before the dam was in place, it can create a little bit of a false sense of what the level of erosion has been, on there. The other thing I think to point out in that 1939 aerial is, you've got that fairly linear piece of the river that comes under the bridge there. And there is some evidence of oil piles on the shoreline that it's possible. We have nothing to document this, but you can see from just the shape changes in the river and the fact that you do have what looks like some agricultural activity in 1939 relatively close to the river. It's possible some of this was mechanical widening, meaning someone dredged that for navigation purposes. Again, we've not been able to find any documentation of that, but there is some evidence of that as a possibility. Current conditions, again, the thing that we saw, and acknowledging we're in a period of low water for an extended period of time, and we've obviously been in a drought for close to 2 years now, and things can revegetate quickly, but we really did not find any areas of aggressive active erosion out there. That's not to say if we did the same inspection in 2020 when the water was high for the better part of a year, you might not have seen some of that. Certainly the cattail mats and some of the bogs can tend to float off in pieces and may not present that, but at this point in time, with the conditions we've been under for an extended period of time here, the shorelines are relatively stable. Again, not implying that has always been the case or will always be the case, but it is observed now. The bottom picture was some imagery that the district took, and I think one of the things that in working with the staff team here is it does show that, part of what's happened here is there has been some natural river processes that move some of these sediments and change the direction of the water, and has actually created some, some pretty unique and interesting habitat within the marsh as part of that. We as humans have certainly accelerated, with some of the development in the watershed over the last 100 years. It maybe shouldn't be happening at the speed at which it does, but it doesn't mean there's not valuable things going on there. I know one of the, just anecdotally, when we were out there during the proposal phase of this with Gabe looking at the project, there was nesting soft-shell turtles in there. There was about a dozen of them by a log, kind of all congregated in there, which is a pretty unique thing to see, in this area. So it's being utilized by wildlife too. And, to whatever extent it's happening at a rate faster than we want to, it is still pretty unique habitat, so. So what we did in looking at the system is a similar analysis to what the district did in trying to assess what has been lost there. Again, looking at the dates of some of these aerials and looking at how that may influence things, and looking at a few key dates, trying to assess to some degree how much land has been lost and what might be recovered if you did that. Some of that gets into some of the areas on here. We've tried to, kind of calibrate that a little bit to the time of year. You can see some of these are spring and fall areas where the water may be a little bit higher. We do have some summer areas and some other years. One key year to point out is that 1974 aerial. That is the closest date we have to FEMA's flood insurance study for this area. So if we were to compare to FEMA's cross sections and we did ever want to do a project, that gives us some sense of what we might be looking at regulatorily, meaning we can't just go filling in the floodplain without some documentation as to why. So it's good that we've got an area there, and that's why we selected that year as one of our analysis areas. I don't think we saw anything out of this that was, anything that we weren't expecting or that wasn't relatively apparent. It's still really hard to define exactly, how much has been lost from a given date, just based on some of the variability of things. I think what I'd say is, generally speaking, I don't think we think it's as aggressive as some of those originally reported numbers, but there certainly has been shoreline erosion, as we might expect. You can see between that 1974 aerial and the 2014 aerial, some of the work that's been done along other parts of the river certainly has an influence on some of this too. We have then developed some fairly simple cross sections at this point, just to provide some, some feeling of what the costs may be. The top kind of represents some existing conditions where we've got some portions where there's a little bit of a bank, 2 to 4 feet maybe, that's exposed, again, largely vegetated. Particularly on the northern and western reaches where there are some trees remaining. You've got the marsh portions that are a little bit closer to there. And then we've kind of just gone through and looked at options that exist to recover bank or stabilize bank as part of things. We've really developed, kind of a suite of options. One is to try to recover land. We know that was part of the goals of the study, and we wanted to assess that. And we've looked at different options for that. We'll get into with some cost estimates. The other is, what if we just stabilized all or part of the bank? And then looking at various treatment options for that. One of the things that I know has been, at the forefront of some of the feedback is the opportunity to do things like they've done up on Grass Lake with the geotube islands. So we've, just looked at that as a potential option. By and large, though, simply, if you wanted to recover things or stabilize, some level of stone in there is going to be necessary, and then how you would backfill behind there would present some logistical challenges. We obviously wouldn't be wanting to bring a lot of offsite material through the property, which means you're probably working from the water. Is that dredged material, which may not be exactly what you want going back into there as far as the type of material to create that marsh habitat? Is it imported material? those are all sort of final details to look at. What we've done with these is just use these to provide some quantification for giving high level cost estimates, which is the next slide. So again, we've assessed these options, to return and restore things to the extent of the 1939 aerial. We've got a little over $9 million estimated. That is generally assuming that we would probably be coming from the water and largely utilizing dredge spoils, working through the options, through the 1974, 2014, and then just armoring. You can see in any way we did this, anywhere from what we've called treatment option 5 to just partially armor the bank in the most likely to erode locations, all the way up to full recovery. These are not going to be low cost projects. The other thing I'll point out is these are generally $2023, meaning they're likely to go up. And right now, these sort of put in the context of one large project. The more you break these out, the more the aggregated number is going to go up. I think the thing is probably less to focus on the specific numbers and more to understand that anything you would undertake here is going to be a costly affair. The thing that we've done a fair bit of research on thus far, and will be part of the final report, but obviously want to a little bit get a feeling of where the board may want to head so we can add more specific information to that. I think it's a very fair statement to suggest there will be substantial regulatory challenges to doing a lot of these things. Again, it really fundamentally is fill in the floodplain that would, be under the jurisdiction of both the Department of Natural Resources Office of Water Resources, in this case, Lake County. We'd have to have very good documentation, justification for why we would do that and how we can do that without causing impacts upstream or downstream, without exacerbating a system that's already prone to flooding. Beyond that, I think large scale structural treatment along there, especially in the current permitting environment, is something that might be an uphill battle with the Corps of Engineers too. In addition to the concerns of how that kind of treatment may relate to to what the character of the site is. Again, not trying to suggest there aren't opportunities for stabilization and not be maybe part of it, but the idea of coming in and restoring to that long-term, that long-term thing, we've put a cost to it and we've kind of put a preliminary concept of what it might look like. It'd be a very uphill battle to get there. I do think there are some things that would be potentially open the district up for other folks that might experience erosion, then looking at how that may be impacting their property. This is obviously a dynamic system, upstream affects downstream and vice versa. Without looking at any specific locations, part of the erosion that's happened along here is certainly part of all of the other things that have happened along the river over the last 100 years. And those are things that, again, some of the other pieces of the study could get to a little bit more, but I think, very clearly, on a qualitative level, there's a lot of hurdles to cross in that. And then just a little summary of the public input. Again, we did offer opportunities for written solicitation of feedback through either email, or we did at the meeting that is in the second bullet point, have some paper things. Most of the feedback that we received, if not all of it, was through that online application we put up. We set up a mapping system where people could drop a pin on and offer their comments. By and large, the comments were, we received 10. By and large, they were, concerned with boater safety in here. Some comments, related to how much access, especially in higher water, boaters may actually have within the natural or within the nature preserve. Wake came up in several of the comments, navigability, safety, those kinds of things. Not a lot of direct comments related to observed erosion, but some of the same issues that, that prompted the study were generally provided in there. We did have a public meeting out at Lost Valley in May. I will say lightly attended on that. I don't think we had any members of the public there. I was invited as part of the project team to attend a week and a half ago, a tour of Grass Lake Island. Largely through the Fox Waterway, but also through the group that's doing the watershed plan update there. So it was interesting to see the island. I hadn't been out there in a couple of years in a boat since they just did about $500,000 worth of work to reinforce the island because it's been sinking. That portion of the lake is on, quite a bit of peat, I think 30-40 feet, they said. That wouldn't be as big an issue on this stretch of the river where there's likely better underlying soils, but one of the things to consider in any treatment that the district may consider is there is long-term maintenance associated beyond those first costs too. Get nothing else from that meeting as far as input for this project. Next steps, again, in some respects, we can answer any questions, happy to tonight, or, by email afterwards on the benefits of our other two tasks were to do some hydraulic model and get into a model and look at, different configurations of the river and how they may impact things, or a more quantitative wake assessment of how boats may be impacting this zone. And then from there, we would finalize those costs and alternatives in a report. I think from conversations I've had with Gabe and others, we can certainly do some hydraulic modeling. I think we generally know, what's going on there. The wake assessment, just from looking at what's happening out there, the type of boat use, the public feedback, which was, several of the comments really focused on that. That is one of those things that I think would help quantify that. One thing to, to just think about in the context, we've got a lot bigger boats than we did not all that long ago moving through that system. The rate of speed at which those boats move is different. And then you do have fairly hard armoring across from this part of the site. Think about reflection, those waves, not only are you getting them from the one side of the boat, a lot of times they can bounce back off those hard surfaces, which is one of those things we talk about. The district, we need to consider how that might impact things, but I think there is part of that that may be providing some impact too. Again, we're here tonight to answer any of those questions, but that would be the next steps. So with that, I am available for any questions or additional discussion. Sure.
I think your presentation was very good. It kind of put it in layman's terms so we could understand what's going on. Maybe I missed the boat, not on yours, but when the guy was here before, didn't he say like it was major, like erosion, I thought, or something? But the way you're putting it, it's really not, hasn't really.
So that gets into when we look at trying to assess how much land has been lost, just using those aerial photographs, and you take 1939 compared to now, and it says, there's an extra 200 feet of land between then and now. Some of that is from erosion. Some of that is from natural movement within the river, because this is one of the more natural pieces of shoreline that's probably functioning a little more natural. Some of it is what I talked about with just those different influences of weather in a given time period, depending on what you compare it to. And, what seemed to be the case is, again, a lot of back in comparison to that 1939 aerial, which for those that aren't aware, that's something you may see a lot. That's the oldest aerial photograph for the most part we have in this region of the country. And so it gets used for comparison for restoration, perspective a lot of times on that. In this case, again, I think what we found is we don't believe that that's necessarily exactly representative of what conditions exist now, because what that doesn't reflect is what portion of inundation from the current dam structure would have happened then. So there's a portion of what's shown as dry land in that 1930 aerial that would simply be underwater because of the dam now, in part in those peninsulas and back in the marsh, where it looks like it was. Now, the flip side of that is there's obviously been a substantial acceleration in development within the watershed since that. More water moving through it, more erosion happening. So there definitely has been some acceleration since then, but that's where we look at, exactly how we compare those things. I think, just very candidly, it's real hard to put an exact number to, because what date do you pick as a starting point? Because we can't go back to pre-settlement. What date do you pick as an end point? How does that relate to what's happened? Some of this is natural change. What we try to do in looking at that suite of dates is kind of look at dates that, have kind of average out. Again, that 1974 date is key. The hydraulic model, where we put a model together that tells us what the floodplain elevation is from 1972 for the Fox River. There's been different pieces and updates, and someday they'll update the whole thing. But that's why that's a key date too, because there may be some justification to say, okay, the model has information in it that says we can go back to this because that's what the floodplain is based off of. So there might be more support for that. That's where that's key. But, right now, I think it's pretty clear when you observe the shoreline, it's not actively eroding. One of the things that's a little bit hard to assess is where you've got cattail marsh and stuff along there. That tends to break off in pieces. And again, that's kind of a natural process in a marsh, but it's not like you walk a stream bank, even, the streams coming in and out of here. Some of those banks are going to have a high eroded bare dirt bank. It's really easy to tell it's eroding. some of those cattail marshes, it's a little harder to tell because it may break off in a chunk and what's behind it will look the same as what was in front. That's a fair bit of what's been lost in that peninsula around those islands. It's that kind of habitat. To a degree, it's natural. To what degree it's been influenced by some of the other things. It's a little hard to tell, but it has. But that's kind of where some of that's.
Any other questions?
Yeah, what's the relationship with Lake County? So are they on the other side of the stream?
Yeah, so this property is actually in Lake County, the majority of it. There's a Lake County Forest Preserve there that they own and operate the marina on the other side of the Fox River there. This would be under the Lake County ordinance. Any work along there would be under the Lake County ordinance, though most of it would be permitted through the Corps of Engineers and probably the Illinois Department of Natural Resources Office of Water Resources for floodway construction.
If there's any expenditures, are they involved in helping pay for anything?
No, I mean, in this case, because the district would be the property owner, if you were to choose to undertake a project, I mean, the most likely scenario, without speaking for Elizabeth or anyone else, would be to try to find grant money, probably for bank restoration on it. Certainly, there's no harm in engaging a bigger conversation. The Fox Waterway has obviously been one of the voices, suggesting that this be looked at, as part of this. Whether they're willing to play some role if you were to choose to do it. Those are conversations that I think are sort of probably post-study conversations, should the district feel that the results of the study suggest a need to look at planning for any kind of stabilization. The other thing that I forgot to mention in there too is one of the things that's been suggested is the sediment coming off of the shoreline has an impact on the depth of the river, and on a strict geometric perspective, it does. When you look at our 6,000-7,000 feet of bank compared to the entire perimeter of the chain of lakes and the entirety of the Fox upstream of here and the entirety of Fox up in Wisconsin, and you're talking a fraction of a percent of the shoreline of the overall system. Especially as you get north of the chain of lakes, there's still a lot of agricultural inputs up there. They're working through some sediment loading information through the study they're working on. The final study will have some assessment of, what percentage of loading may come from our shoreline compared to the overall system. Spoiler alert, it's going to be a very small percentage compared to the overall system.
Yeah. Okay, any other? Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I was wondering, do you provide modeling of future, so 20 years from now, 30 years from now?
Yeah.
As a perspective of if we did nothing,
Yeah.
so I always think of when, we talk about the rivers and streams around here. So I lived in Arizona for a while and visited the Grand Canyon a lot, and no one would stop that from cutting through.
Well, they
Colorado.
have, they've taken all the water.
Okay, yeah, but I mean, it made
Yeah.
its way. So sometimes I just, my mind thinks that what if we were to do nothing, what happens?
So you're not gonna have Grand Canyon North.
No.
Just because it doesn't work that way. So
No.
I think a couple of things on that is there are some very complex and sophisticated models that can look at long-term sediment movement and stuff in there. Those aren't really in a place now where they're, contextual to a study like this, would be practical. Those are sort of theoretical, academic level model kind of things. What our scope for the modeling would be if we look at this is we sort of update the modeling that's available now to the current scenario, look at what some of the parameters, are there related to some of the soils, and, that'll tell us where your erosion would likely to happen, and kind of do an iterative version of, okay, if this is likely to erode here, let's look at this. There are some capacities in just some of the models we would typically use for this, and that we've done some modeling up and down where we can look at how the sediment may move through here. It'll give us an idea on what some of those things are. But one of the things is those long-term predictive models relying on understanding what the flows in the river would be and what the rainfalls would be in the future. That's been a very dynamic thing over the last 10 or 20 years. And that's, for those of you who are aware, a year and a half, 2 years ago, most of the counties in Chicagoland updated their rainfall standards for design to a more current data set, which resulted in our 100-year storm going up 15 to 30% in most areas. So that's just with the last 30 years worth of data. So the short answer is, even if we were to do that in that capacity, it's relying on guessing at what the data is. It will continue to move. There will continue to be erosion. I think, what we've seen out there is some of that's been beneficial for habitat. Are there tipping points where it can be, where it can be problematic? Sure, there can. be that. The other thing I think with the Grand Canyon is a perfect example of that.
Sorry,
is-
I know it's.
No, it's great. I mean, it's honestly a great example because I think what a lot of people lose the context for, because you just don't think in that capacity, is these systems have moved over time on a geologic time frame. I mean, the Fox River was created over, millions of years, right, before we got here. And so part of what we try to assess is to what degree has human influence sped that up, and the Grand Canyon is honestly a case of it's going backwards because we really have taken most of the water and dammed it out of that system. But that was formed over millions of years. We're seeing this change obviously on a much shorter time scale. The evaluation becomes, to what degree is that happening so fast that it's a problem that needs to be fixed? And some of what's happened is over the last 30 years, the answer's been more rock, more rock, more rock. Some of that's just creating problems other places, and so there may be some strategic locations as we finalize this that might be better for restoration. That doesn't mean that going back to 1939, even pre-dam, it was still a very influenced system. There's nothing magic about picking that time frame. It's probably more a case of, is there any key habitat or infrastructure features, obviously not infrastructure in this case, that may need protecting. Generally from our work with Gabe and the group, the real high quality habitat on the site is not at any real risk of loss from erosion. It's, pretty ready along the bank. So those are the kind of things we use to evaluate, what the benefits of stabilization might be.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. And the board guys can look at our packets and all the information that's in the packet. Refer to staff recommendations and stuff.
Yeah, because I was gonna say the staff recommendation, what you'll have in front when we start talking about the agenda next week for action is to forego the hydrologic piece of it and move forward with the weight. And so that would be a reduction of cost, but really the recommendation from the associates is that the pathway that is recommended instead.
We know the wake is impacting things that'll help us quantify that a little bit. So,
All right, thank you.
thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to new business, which is a review of the regular meeting agenda.
In the packet.
Oh, I got it. Go ahead.
Wasn't it on there about the contract for the gas and the, wasn't that?
Request to go to bid, yes, that's not.
Yes, that's on.
Did they ever, I mean, it's kind of a dumb question, but, did they ever think about just getting gas from gas station? I mean, they drive by that all the time.
Well,
So, Pat, we looked at that a few years ago, that question came out. We still have substantial cost savings by getting it out. And,
Because isn't it like 30-40 cents difference from
yeah,
delivered versus?
yes, yeah. So it does save the district money as well as if we decide to go to fueling stations or gas stations throughout the county. It'd be difficult for a good portion of our staff with large equipment, pulling trailers and larger trucks to fill up at some of those stations.
plus the
So-
timing of.
Yeah, windshield time too.
I don't know, I just see like up to Walworth, Montana, it's landscapers haven up there.
Right.
And they come in there with, all their mowers and they fill up in the morning, but. I know,
Well, we have a new system coming in. too,
well, right,
to-
I mean, all that, I mean, it still takes the same amount of time to fill it up, it just tells you what,
Yeah.
how much
Control.
each thing is going.
I mean, we did look at that when we had the discussion, right, of what we were gonna do with the system, and it was going bad. We looked at those options at that particular time, looking at what was the best cost effective way, and then, of course, with the smooth cloud-based solution and the needs of our teams that are dispersed and the number of centers that just make more cost effectiveness for staff efficiency, staff time, travel. We need to take into account all those areas.
I mean, I just asked,
That's a good question.
I mean, like for us, on a farm anyway, it's cheaper to go to get gas, not diesel, because you can't There'd be tractors at the gas stations.
Oh, yeah, road controls.
Yeah.
Yeah, going back to that fuel tracking program, the district just recently purchased that about 2 months ago. And we are currently in the process of converting over the old system to the new fuel tracking system, which will benefit, of course, Andy and his department for fuel, reconciliation and months end. As well as, what's going into those tanks and what's being expensed. We've reduced our fueling stations from 6 locations down to 4, for additional cost savings as well.
Good to ask. All right. Any other changes or anything on the agenda that you can see? We're good with it as far as the consent agenda. I guess we'll keep moving on with that agenda and we'll move on to 7.2, which is Mr. Collins. You're up.
It's just a brief update, last fall. As I think the board knows, the district has been attempting to try to use some of the grant money that's flowing out of Washington. And there are very specific ways and natural resources where you can utilize that money. Unfortunately, it's very difficult for a municipal unit of government to apply directly for it. You have to typically be a state agency or you have to be a tribal agency. So last fall, we partnered with Illinois Department of Natural Resources and DuPage County Forest Preserve and Lake County Forest Preserve to put together a combined project. The state can be the sponsor and then they can funnel money to public agencies as subcontractors to work on property. And the idea was in each of those counties, there are sites where the Forest Preserve or Conservation District owns land and adjoining it, the state owns land as well. So that's where we targeted those areas. And McHenry County, it will be Alden Sedge Meadow where the state owns property, we own some property. Because the application process was very nebulous still last fall, the state did not apply in time. And later this spring, they came back and said, we kind of have a better handle on what it's going to take. We'd like to reapply. The board had approved us applying last fall, so we went ahead and said, sure, we'd like to be part of it if you're going to try to get it. They sent in a letter of intention. The federal government said this looks like a good project. Can you submit a full proposal? So that full proposal is going back at the end of July to the federal government, and we're hopeful that it'll get funded. What it would mean for the district is we'd receive directly about $1.9 million for restoration at Alden Sedge Meadow. And we would probably wind up taking a big piece of the state's money because their property adjoins ours. That would be about $500,000 for work there. The only caveat I would say that I wish it wasn't this way, but it is it's a reimbursable. So we would upfront that money from our dedicated funds and then get reimbursed for it. But it looks very promising. We just wanted the board to get done that we're still moving forward.
Refreshment, I don't know, Alden Sedge Meadow, where's that located?
So if you were driving through the large populous town of Alden and you were to turn left on Alden Road, you would eventually come to an overlook to the east, and that's Alden Sedge Meadow. It's actually a place where 4 streams come together into a very large marsh called Mud Lake, and as it exits, there's only one stream, and that is Nipperson Creek. So that's where essentially the headwaters of Nipperson form, and then they flow east from there. Our work would be both on the west end before the streams enter that lake, and on the east end after they exit the lake. So we'd be working in that whole system. They're really high quality areas, a lot of very unusual things up there, rare plants, rare animals. We've even discovered bison that died there back in the Ice Age and were buried in the peat. And we found them when we were doing work out there and sent to the Field Museum. Cool site.
Neat, yeah. I was actually up there when I was like in 7th grade science class. Our science teacher lived right there. And so we went in his backyard basically and we're in that area. So yeah. Good. Okay, executive director's report.
All right, I will be brief this evening, just a few updates. Wendy had sent out communication, so all of you can dress for a photograph next Tuesday night, since we should all be here. We'd love to get a new head shot of everybody and then a team photo of the board for this new year. So I will do that right before the meetings, if you come a little bit early, and it won't take too long, and then we'll get started. I just want to thank Trustee Weiss-York and Vice President Dom for orientation on Monday. We had a long tour of the day and got a lot in to see a lot of sites, but I appreciate you both taking the time. We visited some areas, and I would encourage if other trustees would like to go back out for another opportunity, maybe to see some areas, for example, some properties, et cetera, that we'll be talking about in the coming months of projects. It's really good out there. You can go visit yourself, or you can get out there to go some places. For example, we went out to Camp Algonquin. We're able to have to look at those particular structures, the Kennedy home. We didn't hit the whole county because there's too much area to cover in the
It's a good part of it though. Yeah.
we did get around to a lot, but I would throw that out to others if you have an interest as well. John, if you have an interest
Thank
too,
you.
would love to be able to offer that to give you kind of behind the scenes tour of that. We did also on July 5th, we had Congressman Schneider come out to visit, basically of interest in with the new districting for the Habitat National Wildlife Refuge. So we had the Friends of Habitat open lands in the district to meet to kind of showcase that property, and I believe there'll be other future meetings as well, so we'll keep you informed. And just if you have not purchased tickets for Sulphur Prairie on September 9th, tickets have gone up, but they're still affordable, and we definitely would love to see a good showing for that. That event is to fundraise for the environmental defenders in McHenry County and the Conservation District and our foundation. And then McCog, for those, thank you, Trustee Everard, for agreeing to join us at the Johnsburg, Village of Johnsburg is hosting next week. Anybody else that wants to go, let us know. We have to give our SVPs on Friday. And then
What day is that?
it is July 26th.
Wednesday.
It's a real fun, kind. It's a good meeting.
Yeah, I went to that one last year. It was my first one.
So we need to know by Friday, and then I have also not heard from anyone on NRPA, so I'm going to assume, if there is change, but we would need to bring it to the board, but I've not heard from anyone on that, so I'm assuming no interest on this year. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, others, the public comment number 2. Anybody else there?
There were a few other people that joined since we started, I don't know if they're still on or not.
No, there is no one.
Thank you.
Okay, entertain a motion to go into executive session. So. Second.
Who was second? Sorry.
Moved and seconded by Sean. We have to say why we're going. Oh, yes. When you made the motion, Lloyd, read the motion to go into the executive session.
Motion to go into executive session pursuant to 2C2 collective bargaining, 2C5 lease purchase of real estate, 2C11 probable litigation, and 2C21 review of closed session minutes of the Open Meetings Act 5 Illinois 120/1, etc. Secret.
That's right.
Treasurer Fritz,
Yes.
trustee Everard,
Yes.
trustee Gayton,
Yes.
trustee Zimmerman,
Yes.
trustee Wazorek,
Yes.
vice president Dom.
Yes. Okay.
So for those at home following us on Zoom, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We will not be taking any action after we come back from executive session this evening.
We can get that.
Have a great evening.
Yep, we're ready for roll call.
Trustee Gayton,
Here.
trustee Zimmerman,
Present.
treasurer Fritz,
Here.
trustee Everard,
Here.
trustee Wazorek,
Here.
vice president Dom.
Here. Okay, so we are reconvened and we can have a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn the meeting.
Stay ready. Second.
Second.
All right,
That was the first one.
trustee Everard,
Yes.
trustee Wazorek,
Yes.
trustee Zimmerman,
Yes.
treasurer Fritz,
Yes.
trustee Gayton.
Yes.
Vice president Dom.
Yes. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Adjourned at 7:17.
Stay here.
Do you
Yeah, all the
need the information on